Okay, Lord. Okay. Okay.
Breathing exercise, Vajrapist. Put your thumb on the base of ring finger. Okay. And close it. Inhale deeply. Full inhalation and exhale. And now you close your left nostril and breathe in right side. Slowly, slowly. Inhale and hold your breath and exhale other side. When you inhale from left side, hold, exhale right side. And breathe both sides. Inhale, in, hold, out. Close left nostril. Inhale right side. Slowly, slowly hold your breath. Exhale other side. Inhale left side. Deep breathing, hold your breath. Exhale right side. Put both hands down. Inhale together. Hold. Exhale. Close your left nostril. Inhale right side. Hold. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Exhale right side. Both hands down. Hold. Exhale. Okay, now just both sides. Your fingers are guiding your breath. Put your hand on the navel, hold, and out. In, hold, out. In is Om. Om. Ah. Om. Om. Ah. Om. Om. Ah. Om. 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 Now we do the happy mantra. It's called the happy heart.
Which mantra?
Happy heart mantra. It's a mantra. It's called Chitta Sukha. Happy heart.
Oh, okay.
Mahasukha, like Chitta Sukha. You have to smile with this mantra, okay? Imagine your heart is laughing very hard. Chitta Sukha Samsam. 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 Chitta Sukha. You have to smile, eh? Chitta Sukha Samsam. 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 Chitta. Mantra is working. Chitta Sukha Samsam. 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 Chitta Sukha
Chita Sukha Sam Sam. Chita Sukha Sam Sam. Chita Sukha Sam Sam.
That's good. Very good.
Now you know the happy heart mantra, right? And this is the point.
The points kind of hurt. Was it supposed to?
Oh, did it hurt?
A little. It felt, and I kept trying to relax it, and I didn't manage it.
Okay, we'll try it again.
No, that's
You have to
okay.
retry. Your turn. My job is finished. Breathing and smiling, laughing, that's it.
Very good.
Bob, you said you had a meditation you wanted to do today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
I did, but did you want to do something?
No, you go first.
Well, I thought that since we're all in a happy mood, we would look a little bit at this issue of emptiness and selflessness. So I think we go into meditative mode. And there's and especially today, I think, in honor of, since today is the death day of Tsongkhapa, which is considered a very, did I already tell the story about him, his enlightenment, two enlightenments? Did I already tell that?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
I did.
To one group,
21 years, and so I already told that story. Right?
to half the group.
What?
You told it to half the group.
Yeah, so he attained full enlightenment in 1398, but he waited 21 years to manifest in a certain way with the whole body in order to keep his monkhood. And he didn't want to be like a male-female like that, because then all young Tibetan monks would run off, and nuns, and they'd find boyfriends and girlfriends and claim that they were doing some enlightenment. And so he waited 21 years, and then so therefore his death day, which is the 25th day of the 10th lunar month, which is today, this year, he attained enlightenment in the Bardo, that physical enlightenment, and it was witnessed by all of his present disciples. I was just looking at his biography. And so it's considered a very happy day, not at all a sad day, although he left his coarse body or his ordinary body at that time, and he moved to the Tushita heaven. And he also did an unusual thing where his disciples begged him to have a reincarnation to continue to lead the new community, the growing new community of the Ganden community, but joyous community it was called. And but he refused, and he said rather he wanted the head of the community to always be elected based on the community's judgment of who was the wisest and the most kind and the most compassionate and the best teacher. And so he wasn't going to reincarnate as the leader. He said if he did reincarnate somewhere, he wouldn't let on to them. He wanted to take a break. And it's believed that he is in the Tushita heaven in the Dharma center of Maitreya Buddha there, Bodhisattva, who's going to be next Buddha. And he teaches Madhyamaka there. So Madhyamaka meaning the central way of selflessness and emptiness. So in that honor, I thought we would just taste this meditation. Some of you may not have heard of it. And some of you may not have heard of what are called the 4 keys of the meditation on selflessness. When there are 2 kinds of selflessness, which is the same thing as emptiness. And it's a description of ultimate reality, and it does not mean that you do not have a self, that you do not exist. What it means is that you do not have a fixed, independent, intrinsically real self. You have a relational, constantly changing self or identity, but not a fixed one that's independent of relationships. That's what selflessness means. So then but if one thing to assert that as pretty simply understandable, logical thing, in the sense that if it's yourself, and therefore it's the one who experiences things that you experience, then it has to constantly change because your experiences are constant changing. And the idea that there's an unchanging witness in there that sees all these changing things without changing is, of course, simply an irrational assertion. Because you can't see something without the process of seeing changing you. And we can, that's common sense only. You don't see it if you don't change. So let's meditate together now on these 4 keys. And I love Buddha because he said, I realize my selflessness and I feel so happy. My relative self is so happy to be free of living in the prison cage of my presumed absolute self that I thought I had. And so I therefore proclaim the insight of selflessness or emptiness, that I myself am empty of any absolute, unchanging, fixed identity self. And I proclaim that. But I'm not asking you to simply dogmatically believe that and go around and say selfless, selfless, and feel that you've sort of solved it by repeating that mantra, anatma. I don't want you to do that. Because actually, I know that you don't feel that way. You do feel that there's something in the very core of your own subjectivity, unless you're enlightened already, that there's something that never changes, that's always you, and it sort of provides, you think, your continuity through the years and through different experiences. There's one unchanging thing that's always there, is the you, the me, the real me. That's what we do think. And so I know that when I say selflessness, those who have that identity habit, as we call it, self-identity habit, feel it as a challenge, actually, rather than as something they can just grab onto. If you just grab onto it without experience, it will almost make you nihilistic, actually. You'll think that you don't exist, or something like that. That your real self is your non-existence, because you so strongly have that habit. Okay? So now the first key, now meditate. You already did the breathing, so you're calm and you're concentrated. So the first key is a very strange one, very surprising one. It's called identifying the negandum, that which is to be negated, and which is negated by the expression selflessness or non-self. In other words, that's a negation, and it negates some kind of self. So in order to understand a negation, you have to understand what is being negated. And so the first key is identifying what is being negated by selflessness. In order to do that, you have to use your memory. You have to remember a time in your history, which probably isn't too hard, when someone falsely accused you of something. Not when they accused you when you did it, when you really did it, but when they falsely did by mistake. They think you did something which they're perhaps annoyed about, and they accuse you of that. You did so-and-so. What did you do with my whatever it was, or why did you do that? And they go like that. And emotionally, of course, it's very strong when someone you care about falsely accuses you. And you go through a cycle, when you're falsely accused, you go through a cycle where first you are kind of the injured innocent, and the second you are the righteously indignant, and then eventually you become, if they keep accusing you, become the angrily indignant, righteously angry, and righteously right, okay? But those later phases of that cycle are not what this meditation wants you to remember. It wants you to remember the first moment of when you were injured innocent. You know you didn't do it, and yet this person is insisting that you did. And so before you kind of protest even to them, you're kind of like, how could they think I would do that? And you're sort of checking that you didn't do it. And you're just in a state of incredulity that they would blame you in such a way when you're so innocent. And then there's a further trick in this key beginning of the meditation on selflessness, personal selflessness. And that trick is where you're remembering cognition, memory cognition, should be a small fraction of your consciousness. As if you were observing yourself in the memory from a hiding place, like spying on yourself, looking through a curtain. And your main consciousness should be re-inhabiting the memory and trying to feel how you felt and really getting into it, like a method actor or something, really feeling the feelings of injured innocence. Okay? So that's the exercise, that's the meditation. The 11th Dalai Lama wrote that you need to spend about 6 months on this one. Or at least 6 weeks. And we don't really have that time. So, let me just say that when you succeed in this meditation, is when you encounter within your sort of emotional and conceptual self that feeling that you felt of pure innocence and also misunderstood innocence and injured, hurt feeling innocence, and the innocent you that you felt you were feels like it's undeniably innocent and undeniably solidly there, maybe somewhere in your solar plexus, in your heart or chest. And feelings come up like a hot feeling, like a feeling of heat, sort of like embarrassment, sort of not too different from shame or embarrassment, flush of that, or the first flush before you get angry, flush of frustration. And that flush of the injured innocent, the hurt feeling innocent, feels as if it comes from the real you place. And they say you have succeeded in this key of identifying that which is negated by selflessness. When you realize that at a visceral level, you do not agree with Buddha's statement that you're selfless. And you suddenly realize that he, instead of giving you some dogma or something, he's challenging you. Buddha, Nagarjuna, Manjushri, Tsongkhapa, whoever it is. The Buddha's teaching. You're being challenged. You're being challenged to consider that that very solid you that you feel inside is illusory. He says it doesn't exist the way you feel it exists. And you say, sorry, but it seems to me to be really, really solid. Solid me. I'm innocent. I didn't do it. Don't say I did it. Don't think that, etc. That I of protest that arises from the hurt feeling seems to come from it be rooted in an absolute place that is the real you. So we don't have hours and weeks and months. So we're just rehearsing this. But you can, I hope, understand what I mean. It's very surprising. It's a special oral tradition coming from Tsongkhapa through the Dalai Lamas and the Panchen Lamas, especially. Very, very special tradition. But in all the Buddhist communities, it also is present, this particular teaching. So then when you realize that you have a debate going with Buddha about yourself, a very, very deep and vital debate, you then come to the second key. And the second key is called, well, it's called the ascertainment of logical pervasion, which I think doesn't mean much to us because we're not trained in that system of logic, although it has a technical meaning in English. What I like to call it is a commitment to conventional binarity or duality in the following sense. When you really feel the real you there, in your habitual, visceral feeling of being really me here, you then take up Buddha's challenge. You respect Buddha enough, however, to take up the challenge. And you then decide, okay, I don't agree and I don't feel selfless in that sense, but he says so. He says I am. That's how he sees it. So I will double check. I will look within to verify what I feel in my debate with Buddha. And in doing so, I should actually find, since I will put my total effort into it, because this is the most meaningful thing I can do in life, is discover really what I am. Double check if how I feel I am is what I am. So I will put my full effort into it, of my real self. But if I fail to find that real self, I then will deal with the implications of that failure. I will not waffle around and go for some third option. Well, maybe I'm there, maybe I'm not there. I won't do what I wouldn't do about in conventional reality where there's a yes or no situation. If I can't come up with a yes, solid yes, with my full effort, then I have to go for no. And I make a commitment ahead of time to that. That's the second key. Again, very surprising. It's like kind of the law of excluded middle, which is the way the conventional, habitual mind works. The reason for it perhaps being that when you go deep inside in this way, all kinds of strange corridors are there, and rooms, and funny byways. So you want to come out with the result in a practical way. And that's the reason for the second key. And avoid being trapped in some sort of weird, mysterious byway. Then there are various, sometimes there's 4 more keys, or 5, a total of 7. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's only 1. But first let's meditate on the 2. So the first one is that I feel that real Bob is here in me. So real Bob is going to double check to verify this. So how do I do that? I examine myself. I look through it all. And the Buddhist tradition has given me a scheme known as the 5 psychophysical processes, or literally the 5 heaps. Skandhas is the Sanskrit word. It really means a pile or a heap. But we'll call them processes. And these are the material process of my body and nervous system, etc. Then there's the sensational process of my sensations of pleasure, pain, or numbness, which is the first coarsest level of mind connected with the material processes. Then there's my conceptual process, flow of ideas and images in my mind. Then there's the emotional process, flow of reactions to those ideas and those sensations. My emotions of suffering or joy or whatever it might be. And finally, there's my consciousness itself, my awareness of all those processes. So 5 levels of process, starting with the most obvious one, which is the body. Now, since I did my first key more thoroughly than we've been able to do this afternoon, I recognized that when I felt I am innocent, all these many times I've been accused in my life of things that I didn't do, it feels like that I is almost physical. You know, when the flush of heat, of embarrassment, of hurt feelings, of shame, of righteousness, of anger, when those energies arise from my guts, from my heart, my solar plexus, it seems as if they come from a real physical place. I have recognized by now. So now I look inside my physical aggregate to find that place. I can go through all my nervous system. I look in my, whatever image I have of my anatomy. I go into my heart center. I go in my brain. And depending on how sophisticated it is, then maybe I go into the atoms that make up my heart and my brain. Then I get into wave-particle paradox if I do quantum. And even those particles dissolve under analysis, disappear into waves. So pretty soon, I come up with a puzzling result that I can't find some little bob in there. A little bob template, a little bob node, a little homunculus. It's easy for us in modern time because materialistic science has analyzed matter very thoroughly, and it has dissolved under their analysis actually since 1926. So that's helpful to us actually. So we say, okay, it's got to be in the mind and not in the body. So then I look, then again, when I felt I'm innocent and I'm hurt, that was a kind of sensation. I felt it was unpleasant. So then I look into that memory carefully, because it's vivid in my mind if I've done the first key strongly. And then, you know, when you look at any sensation that you have, like even a sharp pain, you stick yourself with a point of something, a sharp little pain, but if you meditate on that little sharp pain, it sort of gets diffused and you can't find the absolute point of the pain. You know, if you use your mindfulness and look at it carefully, you can't find it. You know, so the sensation of I, where the I seems to come from as a sensation, you can't find one sensation that was Bob Thurman's. So you reject that your real self is a sensation. It's not at that level of mind, pretty quickly. Then the conceptual level of process is a little more complicated because you have a name, Bob, whatever your own name is. If someone looks at you and calls you by a wrong name, you have that odd feeling that it doesn't sort of hit you, their summoning call. And you kind of look behind yourself, who are they talking to? Or you'll correct them, what your real name is. But if they look at you and summon your attention in some way by repeating your actual name, it feels like it mobilizes from you get fully mobilized, you engage. So it seems to hit you. But where does it hit, Bob? Are you really Bob? Or whatever your name is, Jason. or whatever your name happens to be. So you start then Bob itself. Where's the Bob? Is it in the B and the O and the B? Is it in the written form, B-O-B in English letters? You could write Bob in Devanagari, Bob, Naro, Bob, Bob, Bob. They all look different. So the name doesn't seem to be the real me, actually, since I could have different names. But it takes a little analysis to overcome the feeling of, like, that somewhere hanging on your heart is a little charm bracelet, one of those little necklaces that high school kids wear with their name woven on it. And then a picture of yourself, if you have, like what you look like in the mirror, or what you did look like in the mirror at the time you had that feeling. Is that the real you? That image, because that's part of the conceptual aggregate, are images, not just words. And then which picture, and from what angle, and your whole body, or just your face, etc. And your face at which moment, and what expression, when Gela has just tickled you with the chitta, sukha, sam, or when you're looking solemn, or what, when you're being photographed for your passport. So pretty soon all the images you have of yourself become relative, and there's no real image of yourself you can't find, so you reject that that solid thing you feel in there is actually simply a concept, but a real concept, or the referent of a real concept. You reject that. Then the emotion of I'm injured innocent, I have hurt feelings, I'm righteously indignant, and even I'm angry and self-righteous, and all of those emotions, they are all completely fluctuating, changing. They sort of seem to come from a real place, but none of them are fixed. They just rise and fall. They mobilize all kinds of hormones and, feelings of heat, hot and cold in your body, but they can't be a fixed absolute you. Any of them, so you reject that aggregate. Finally, you come to consciousness aggregate. Then consciousness aggregate is a little bit complicated too. At first it seems, oh yeah, good, that's just my consciousness. But you can then divide that into 6 when you become self-analytical about your consciousness. Because you have visual consciousness, audio consciousness, smell consciousness, taste consciousness, tactile consciousness that goes along with your skin and your surfaces. And they're very complicated, they're always changing, depending on the stimulus from your environment. And then there's the 6th consciousness, the way the Buddhists understand, called mental consciousness. And it quite often is aligned with one of the sense consciousnesses, therefore always changing by paying attention to what you're seeing, changing by paying attention to what you're smelling, or touching, or hearing, etc. And they're always changing. Then you can have inner imaginative objects, mental objects in your mind. Like you can visualize the Washington Monument, the Potala Palace, the face of your loved one, the medicine Buddha. And so you can have mental images in your consciousness. And your mental consciousness changes depending on which image you have in the mind. But there must be one that doesn't change, because I feel as if it's always me, Bob, having that experience. So then you come to the most difficult part of this meditation, the most important one, where you turn your subjectivity around on your subjectivity. So you try to observe yourself observing. And for this, to really succeed in this, you have to have quite a good degree of concentration, because the mind will veer off. It's much harder to hold your mind on this than it is on your breath, or on a mantra, or on an image of Buddha. It's very difficult to hold the mind focusing on the mind, drilling down, so to speak, into your subjectivity, with your subjectivity. and you drill down toward that feeling that you had identified, that you really are innocent, and that's the real unchanging you, the independent self-identity. Identity means always the same. Idem in Latin means the same, identity. And you have this strange, actually, if you do it strongly and you have concentration, it becomes nauseating. You become very uncomfortable. You become dizzy, because you're sort of turning the root of your subjectivity on the root of your subjectivity. And then each time you turn it, it seems to, like a dog's tail when it whirls around to catch its tail, it seems to swivel out of your purview, away from your observation, and yet it's still observing. So it's like it's honing in on this thing that around the corner you still think is very solid. But every time you get to the corner and look for it, it's sort of around the corner behind you. So you're kind of jumping from corner to corner, twisting like a dog, drilling. This becomes like what they call the diamond cutting drill, if you have that concentration level, which is quite a strong one. And what eventually happens is like, you have a kind of experience like you have a diamond held in a vice grip, and you have a drill press of a diamond-tipped drill bit, and that which drill press is your concentration, and the pressure of the bit and the swirling of the drill bit is your critical insight, your vipassana, your transcendent insight, and you're pressuring diamond against diamond. And it's spinning, each one is equally hard, so they're spinning and spinning. And you don't want to, but eventually the drill press and the drill vise start to evaporate. And the two diamonds produce kind of light and heat. It's searing like white hot heat, and which melts everything around it. And what happened if you can sustain it, which is, you know, this, I say we're rehearsing this. But you can imagine this, perhaps, in the rehearsal. If you sustain it, what happens is that everything melts in the universe, but at a certain point, but these two diamonds bearing on the diamond, drilling on each other, and then they finally dissolve into a luminous space like equipoise, as they call it. And that means at this point you have entered what is called the space-like equipoised samadhi of selflessness. And you have a feeling of tremendous release, tremendous relief. And there's a little danger here. And the danger is that you will think that, oh, this selfless state is myself. It's my reality. So my reality is just a space with nothing in it. Unfortunately, people have made this mistake. They think that this space is emptiness or selflessness, which it is not, actually. Because selflessness means only the absence of an absolute self, not the absence of a relative self. Because it's the relative self that experiences this sense of selflessness. And so the momentum of pressure, of inquiry, of penetrating insight, critical insight, continues without verbalization, without effort, without thought. Because you've achieved a concentration to achieve this. You have a high degree of concentration. And what happens is the space-like state of relief, although one can indulge in it for a while, but it itself dissolves. The inquiry thing is no longer looking for the hard rock of the self in oneself. It's exploring this vast space which you've dissolved. So it's not something that you're not like you're floating in space and then you think I'm going to look around in space. It's just that your awareness looks around this feeling of infinity. And when it looks at infinity, it realizes that the infinity itself is also not absolute. It was only a relational state to having thought that there was this finite thing you were going to catch. And in a way, it's a kind of a failure of the catching the finite state. My great Lama Tara Tulku put it beautifully. He said, what it is your relative self has been so long imprisoned and entwined with the cancer of an assumed absolute self that you simply assumed was it. That when the absolute self disappears, it takes the relative self with it, temporarily. Unless the relative self is not aware of what's called the royal reason of relativity, of the emptiness of emptiness, the deepest level of emptiness, or the shallowest level of emptiness. That emptiness also is empty. And what happens when the space disappears? When the space disappears, you're back amongst all of the differentiated objects. You're back as a separated subjectivity who had an experience of disappearing into a vast luminous space, which was a big gas, a pleasant experience, a relief. But that relief itself is not an absolute state. It was a relative state. It's the realization of the emptiness of emptiness. And so then, and what's important is that the differentiated things, this is called entering the dreamlike aftermath samadhi, or the illusion-like aftermath samadhi, where interacting with relational things becomes a samadhi, a meditation. And why is it illusion-like? Not because things look like rainbows, necessarily. They might, to someone with a certain affinity in karma, but it does not. Mainly, things look also as if they were sort of really real again. And then you feel like, oh, darn, I let go of the self and I was feeling so released. And now I seem to be really here again, but I thought I discovered I wasn't really here. My unreal self discovered that the real one was an illusion. But now this illusion seems to be back. That's why it's illusory. So then, you have this double consciousness. You finally become cured of being a helpless victim of your own ignorance. Because you have a balancing consciousness, a cognitive dissonance tolerant consciousness, in the following sense. The best inexpressible, actually. I mean, I can't say anything to describe it. It's inexpressible, but the analogy will be very helpful. When you look in a mirror, like you see your face in a mirror, it looks like you're in the mirror. The room behind you looks like another room in the mirror. It's illusory in that sense. It looks like a three-dimensional space in the mirror, and there's your face there. But you know, without thinking, at a subliminal intuitive level, that you're not that face in the mirror. It's merely a reflection of yourself, of your face, in three-dimensional, habitual, relative reality. Right? You know that simultaneously. So that simultaneous knowledge, without thinking twice, corrects a tendency to grab into the mirror, like put your eyeliner on the face in the mirror, shave the face in the mirror, or whatever. Reach in there to do something. It immediately corrects that. So you're not taken in by the illusion. So once you achieve the space-like equipoised samadhi of selflessness and return to the illusion-like aftermath samadhi, the space-like equipoised samadhi, memory of it, becomes like the subliminal knowledge that the whole of reality is only a reflection in the mirror of clear light of the void, of transparency of voidness, which a synonym of which could be simply freedom. Freedom is also a negation. People don't realize, they think, freedom, I want freedom. But freedom is actually a negation. It means being free of something. So it's also a negation. So it could be translated emptiness, actually. Free of intrinsic identity. Freedom from intrinsic identity, you would say. Empty of intrinsic identity. They're like virtually the same. So that is a really good analogy. But of course, at first, if you only had that space like equipoise samadhi one time, in the conclusion of one kind of inquiry meditation, then the sense of it, the mirrorness, is not so strong as the tendency to begin grasping up to the differentiated objects and grasping at yourself as the differentiated, alienated subject. Like, because your ignorance habit is still very strong, and your wisdom habit, the cognitive dissonance, paradox, tolerating habit is not strengthened. So you have to repeat this kind of thing. That's why it takes a long time. It's a gradual process, really. There are momentary satori's, breakthroughs, but which can be quite powerful, but it's a longer term process, like melting butter in the broth, the great Atisha said. Or like ironing the wrinkles out of a cotton cloth with the ironing hot stone. Slow, gradual process. Repeating this kind of meditative thought experiment again and again. But it's lovely, the term is so lovely, the dream-like aftermath samadhi. Because once you know that whatever it is that you feel is the most solid things, the most intrinsically real things around you, the most absolute things around you, that people live and die over, actually. So the sense of misplaced absoluteness is really powerful. You know, religious fanatics, or ideological communist fanatics, or capitalist fanatics, or whatever, you know, egotistical fanatics, psychotics, they all think there's this absolute that's the real them, or the real thing that they want, or the person that they hate, you know. And they all absolutize all these things, and then they act all completely, relationally destructive. Because they are not really fitting into relativity, because of these false concepts that they're imprisoned by. So it's a huge relief to first even discover the first one is not really the way it seems. That's what's called the balm or the medicine, the elixir of emptiness. It's an elixir that heals and soothes the sharp edges of misplaced absolutisms, of self and things. And it's the foundation of all of those things. You then realize that you are imagining yourself like you do in a dream, even in awake. And that is not a crippling or a threatening thing when you realize it. What it is a liberating thing. It becomes an opportunity to reimagine yourself. And it becomes there's a warning of not letting yourself be imagined by authorities, by tradition, by others, you know. To create yourself carefully, systematically, and use the technologies of self-creation that exist, that the enlightened beings have left for us, out of their kindness.
Yeah.
Ding!
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you.
May I ask a question? Is that okay? Or later?
You know, the guy who, you know, Eckhart Tolle, who saved his own life from suicide out of depression. He did that because the reason he was going to kill himself, if you know his work, that guy, is that the voice that was telling him he was no good and life was not worth it and the universe was horrible and blah, blah, blah. He might as well kill himself. It seemed like an absolute mandate to him. And the way he saved himself was somewhere he somehow intuitively, instinctively sensed at a deep level where he was close to killing himself, the way he tells it, at a deep level that that voice was not absolute, that he didn't have to listen to it. So another voice, a critical voice, rose in him saying, why are you listening to this? This is not your absolute voice speaking from your absolute self. It's just a bad habit, bad trend. And you don't have to listen to it. So that's the discovery of relativity. Although he didn't put it in those terms because he doesn't know this. He didn't learn this. He thinks it's just he got into now. Now told him. I know the guy, we're friends. Or I explained this to him over pasta. In an Italian restaurant. Best place to have a Dharma talk. And in between slurping pesto, spaghetti, he agreed. He claimed he's writing a book to say that there's different kinds of the now. If the now is captured within some kind of notion of materialism and nihilism, it becomes an escapist, psychotic now, although it's a bit of a relief to people, but then they get stuck in it. If the now is the infinite, if the now contains all causality from the infinite past of your evolution, and the fact that you and all beings are each other's mothers, and then the infinite future of your Buddhahood, it's like much cooler now. Instead of a dead Mao, a dead American Mao. Dead mouse Mao. Mao Zedong Mao.
But there's some people who want to ask a question.
Sure. Yeah. Not just to me. Menla,
Please just actually.
Oh.
Isa.
He won't be able to hear you otherwise.
Okay. My question.
Well, Lorraine always has a question.
I know, I'm so sorry. I keep
No,
telling
that's
myself
very
I'm not
good.
going to ask anymore, but I can't.
You're not
help it.
sorry. You're sukha chitta
Sukha
sam.
samsam.
You're not sorry. Okay, what's the question?
Well, my question then, meaning after everything you've just said, is about enlightenment and the moment or the impossibility of there being a moment of enlightenment.
Yeah, sure. Of course there's a moment of enlightenment.
But
Actually, since this is Tsongkhapa's holiday and we're having a puja about that in an hour, we're going to light candles because it's a festival of candles in Tibet. It's Tibetan Hanukkah, candle festival. And the Jews thought they came from Ur, but they actually came from Tibet. So, actually, because they herded animals, in Tibet, and they wanted. Okay, never mind. That's a joke. So, Tsongkhapa's specialty as about enlightenment that actually annoyed some other Tibetan lamas, actually, and even may annoy people in general, was the total non-duality of enlightenment. And what is so important about that is, you see, you can have an experience of oneness. I think I mentioned it already in a talk yesterday, which I call the cheap oneness, where you go into something like that space-like equipoise samadhi, and you think that's enlightenment, because it's a big relief to get in it, and you may be guided by a philosophical naivete, let's say, or an intellectual naivete, where you think that a relative thing can find an absolute, and which is the natural one. Moses, this bush, this like dumb bush, just like our dumb bushes. Another dumb bush told him, go tell Pharaoh and let my people go and everything. And Moses, first he tried to be logical. He said, look, who are you? Oh, you're God. Okay, well, you go tell Pharaoh. He might listen to you more than me. Which is what? That's a way to talk to a burning bush that's giving you orders. Like, question that. And then, and not only that, but then that bush says, no, I'm going to go tell Pharaoh not to agree with you. Oh, what? Why are you sending me? He might kill me and so on. You know, like, it's the whole story. So human beings think that's all very normal. You know, in 2001, remember that movie?
Oh, yes.
There's a big black stone, all beautifully carved and rectangular. They're all looking at it. That's the absolute. It's a big black stone. But that's a relative thing. You couldn't see it. Absolute means you can't relate to it. Absolute doesn't relate to the relative. Or it's not absolute. All the theologians, they say, God creates the world, but he's not related to it. The world is nothing, just everything is God. That's just asinine, irrational statements. They just say that because they're feeling absolute, you know, and they're up on the pulpit there. And that's their absolute ego projection. You follow me? So the royal reason of relativity, if you don't know that anything you can experience, because you experience it, is relative.
Yes.
Okay? A relative being cannot experience the absolute. It's impossible. Or it's not absolute. Okay? But all that the absolute is, in a way, therefore, is the negation of any relative absolute. You could say. That's what emptiness is, or freedom is. You can't find freedom, but you can be free from something. But freedom itself as an absolute is just a negation. Okay? So, I know you're brimming with new questions before listening to the answer, but
I'm trying so hard.
I'm
I
not
am listening.
I'm
pushing the
getting
question
there.
Yes.
And if you have to try to follow the thinking. So, Tsongkhapa's special thing was, he did not go for the cheap oneness. He attained it many times. It's all one space. And everything really is that. It all dissolves into that. And I'm here knowing that. And nobody else is around to bother me. And I don't have to worry about them because they all dissolve into it anyway too. So I've disappeared permanently from the universe. And I've become absolute. And we call that, oh, I'm one with God. And he disappeared too. God doesn't care about anybody but the Brahmins. You know? Because they all disappear. That's cheap oneness, I call it. So cheap. Of course, it's actually ultimate psychosis. You go into a psychotic state because the mind is so powerful. You go, you know, because you are feeling that we're the real us, is that we are something that nobody else can be, and is not relative to anything, because it's the really real, and we run around with this psychotic center, which we've never found, but we are certain that it's there. And actually we have a strong escapist wish to withdraw into it. And we can even, if we become a materialist and we're tired of being threatened with hell by some preacher, we can then go and say, oh, but that thing, that absolute is actually nothingness, which things really are. And so I just all have to do is shoot myself and I'm released and escaped. I've escaped from everything. That's just, so who needs space like Eko Samana? Just shoot yourself. Those Zen guys who think that Buddhist emptiness is the same as their material, because they're biologists or something, you know, before they got Zen, you know. And that the real thing is they're just going to disappear, and that's modern Buddhism. They're wasting their time being Zen. They should just shoot themselves. Right away. No. No, you have to control your mind, not thinking. So don't have a special thing.
But see, my problem is that I don't think I have a
shush. Tsongkhapa's special smile is good, but shush. Tsongkhapa's special thing was that he fully got that, and he realized that the real expensive oneness, the Buddha oneness, the jewel oneness, is you are everybody else. There, in a way, you take your psychosis and you embrace everybody in it. So actually, you don't escape from them. There's no escape. You're with them forever, and they're with you forever. And you see that they're fine, actually, because everything is bliss, transparency, vajra reality, which gives you a good encouragement as a doctor. You see there's health in them. They are made of health, actually. Health is bliss. Bliss is health. Same. And this is the amazing thing. Tsongkhapa said in 1398 when he achieved that understanding, he said it was the opposite from what he expected. And he was 41 years old, and he was a master scholar of all of Buddhism. Incredible. He was sought after all over Tibet as a teacher and everything. Master teacher. But he said it was opposite from what he expected. But what did he mean by that? I mean, I don't really know. I didn't achieve that, but I think I have a good idea. And that is, if you attain enlightenment where you are the whole universe, all the beings, that is all their subjectivities, then who the hell are you? You're not a big deal. No way. In fact, you're all blissed out, so you're not even bothered to be a deal. But who's the big deal then? They're all a big deal. Why? Because they're not enjoying themselves. They're suffering. They're going to hell, they're harming each other. So enlightenment is a state of being everybody, with everybody, for everybody. Therefore, the enlightened being becomes the servant of everybody, not some higher being above them. This is why certain Tibetan lamas after Tsongkhapa get really irritated with him. Because people who have a little bit disappearing experience, and they were high lamas, they had big meditations. They go into big states of divine states and trance states and stuff, and then come back and have high concentration. They know a lot of books. They read a lot of stuff. But emotionally, they're freaked out to really be equal with everybody else. Enlightenment is you're the same as everybody else.
And you really think that they are freaked out by that?
And the problem is they don't think so. They keep worrying. What is it? What is it? What is it? But actually they're fine and they can relax. So you're just there to serve them and answer their questions forever. And some of them think they're going to keep questioning you forever. But that gets tiresome to you a little bit. So now and then you tell them to be quiet and think. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, you're not. I know you're not.
No, I am.
But what do you say?
I'm kidding. Are you kidding?
What do you say to someone?
I'm kidding. Are you kidding?
I don't know if I'm kidding.
So Bob, I'd like to talk a little bit here. Can I talk?
But this is really key though. Because why? The High Lama, the enlightened person, how many of these boring enlightened people do we have running around? And what do they want? 55 Rolls Royces. Maybe they want sexual services. Maybe they want to just be worshipped. What do they want? They want to be higher than you.
Yes.
That's the key point. But the real one is not. His Holiness Dalai Lama totally blew my mind in Switzerland last year, after 48 years, or 2 years ago. And he loves to teach this verse that the Buddha says. He says, mendicants, a wise person accepts my teaching after critical reflection, like a goldsmith buys gold after burning, cutting, and rubbing it on a touchstone. And the cutting is critical analysis. Rubbing it on a touchstone is measuring it against your experience. You know, I forgot what cutting is. I don't know, but they all fit in commentary. You know? And doesn't just accept it because the gold seller says this is gold. So they don't accept out of faith in me, he says. It's a Buddhist statement verse from Sutra. So His Holiness was explaining that to 10,000 people in Switzerland in a big auditorium. And then he leaned forward. He was sitting on that kind of throne like Dalai Lama sits on. And he leaned forward like that. And he just assumed the posture of a very humble waiter in a Chinese restaurant. Like, do you want, like noodles or like whatever? And he was saying he could just see Shakyamuni Buddha. He said, I can see poor Shakyamuni Buddha. He says, telling his students, don't just accept what I say because I have this weird looking thing with big ears and a dome on top of my head and lights coming out of my ears. But accept it if it fits in your reason and it fits with your experience, then you use it and find it useful, then you accept it. And he said he's begging them to think it through and take it into themselves and find the challenge in their own mind to what he teaches them. Not just say, oh, Buddha said so, so now I believe in selflessness. That's useless. And I was looking, there were a bunch of lamas, and there were a bunch of other kinds of priests, because he always likes multi-religious students. As I was on one side of the stage, because I wasn't really properly attending, I was just kibitzing because I was there on some job, And they were looking kind of nervous. And because the paradox of the guy who's the top authority, the Dalai Lama, supposedly, he is a great scholar in Tibetan and so on, and everyone acknowledges it, and a great practitioner. He always says he isn't, but he is. And here he's saying, like, I'm your servant. I'm not some high thing that you're supposed to, put on a pedestal, although people do. But the actual real one is not like that. The real one is at whatever level the people are, meeting them where they need to be met. And this was Tsongkhapa's great, I'm praising Tsongkhapa. I'm sorry, I'm not fully going, we can do more on this. But I'm praising Tsongkhapa. And he realized that. So he, for example, he could have right at that moment resigned as a monk, as a mendicant, and he could have gone into some yogas, like unexcelled yogas, this yabyum business, high chakra things, and really far out things that they do. He could have done that. But if he'd done that, his whole attempt to create the monastic university thing as a really solid center of Tibetan culture, instead of the army, this thing of creating this education system as the heart of the country, as the main budgetary item of the country, it would have been defeated because a lot of younger fake people who think they're enlightened would rush off and grab some and fool around. So he just worked for his people for 21 years, and denied himself some levels of the bliss of enlightenment, and he worked very hard, organized, made statues, built buildings, dealt with things, politics, just like His Holiness Dalai Lama has worked unbelievably hard for 60 years rebuilding Tibetan culture in India, building monasteries. He just tore his heart out for all his people. It's just extraordinary what he's done. And for the world, and told all these leaders this and that, and been begging the Chinese, talk to me, just meet, talk to me. And they're so imprisoned in their paranoia, they haven't been able to do it. Except Xi Jinping might. Because when he was 1 year old, he was blessed by the Dalai Lama. He doesn't remember. But his father liked the Dalai Lama and brought him to be blessed as a child. 1954. Definitely. Xi Jinping. So, just a second. So that's why Tsongkhapa's service to us all, to the Tibetans, and therefore to all of us, was so huge, because he didn't just decide, I'm now enlightened and I'm going to sit back and collect donations and everybody can worship me. He didn't do that. He totally went to work at every level that was needed to do the work. This is around the turn of the 15th century. Tibet had a hugest renaissance. And actually, nobody understands the culture of Tibet. My colleagues absolutely do not. Because they can't understand it, because there was this Protestant ethic thing going on in this Euro-American academia. And they think it was so brilliant. Martin Luther was a genius, and Calvin, because they shut down all the monasteries in Europe. But what happens when you shut down all the monasteries? All the young men want to go fight somebody. They want to have a war. And then they want to procreate too, and your population explodes. And then what do you do with that population? You go out and genocide the Native Americans, the Africans, the Indians, the Chinese, as many people as you can, and try to conquer the world. And they did. Right? And they think, therefore, that's a really great thing. But everybody who was conquered doesn't think it was a great thing. And now they're destroying the world. Same bunch of people. They're destroying it. And they're destroying themselves because they're loonies. So the monastery is the great institution that conquers militarism in history, in societies. It was invented by Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. 8 centuries before the Chinese could tolerate, 7 centuries before the Chinese could tolerate, and 8 centuries before the Europeans could tolerate. And they know the Muslims don't have monasteries. There's nothing about celibacy in Islam. But some people should be celibate. They're happier. They don't know what to do on Saturday night, so they go and shoot people in rock and roll instead of, because they're lousy lovers.
Everyone's telling me not to ask a question.
What?
Everyone's telling me not to ask a question.
Other people
there
need
might
to
be
have
No, no.
people.
Yeah.
Well, let me get Gabriel.
But I
who's,
haven't asked my question yet. I'm sorry, I'm leaving first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay. What's your question?
And I
Next
just
question.
want to know.
Next question.
Wait, hold on.
It's good.
How
You're right.
am I deluding myself?
What's that?
How am I deluding myself? What trap am I falling into if I agree with everything you're saying and it all makes sense to me?
If you agree with everything I'm saying,
And I don't.
if it make you said two things. If you agree with what I'm saying for no reason, then you're
No.
up a creek.
It's-
If it makes sense, then you better stop disagreeing. If it makes sense.
It does make sense.
Oh, then what's the problem?
I'm not an enlightened being.
Well, who says? How do you know? If you're not enlightened, you don't know what you are.
That's
Isn't that true?
I don't
Oh.
know. I don't know what I am.
Oh,
That's right.
So that certain statement that you just made, I'm not an enlightened being, you don't even know what you are.
Well,
If you're not enlightened, you don't know. You might be.
oh, and that's a great answer to my question. So that's a trap I'm falling into.
What?
It
I'm
is.
sorry, what?
It's a great answer to my question.
I'm not interested in being a great answer. I'm interested in whatever makes sense to you. If it makes sense, then you should chew on that sense. It's the only reason I
Yes.
shut down your tendency to ask more questions before listening to answers.
One of my problems
Because
is
that
I
will
can't-
help you.
yeah, I can't articulate things
Because
well.
someone who is in the grip of not listening to their own common sense, one of the defenses is a kind of wrong kind of a doubt, where just sort of automatically doubt everything to avoid thinking with your common sense. That's a kind of doubt that is not creative. Creative doubt is a doubt that seeks common sense, and when something makes sense, oh, then you choose on that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
how's that?
That is good.
Good. Okay, Gabriel. That's the angel Gabriel.
Cita Sukha Samsam.
And when did-
Cita Sukha Samsam.
When did the first Dalai Lama come in this story after Tsongkhapa? How can you tell that story? How
I'm sorry,
the
when
first
did the first Dalai Lama?
came into this story after? How the first Dalai Lama came in this story after Tsongkhapa? What was the first Dalai Lama doing? In this whole.
He actually was a nephew of Tsongkhapa from Amdo. He was also Amdoa.
One of
And
the-
Tsongkhapa was Amdoa. And actually Tsongkhapa almost looked like a Westerner. One of his negative nicknames was Amdo Nawache. Big-nosed Amdo. He was. So he was a cousin, and he came to central Tibet, and he was one of Tsongkhapa's later disciples, because he was only born in 1392. But he was, of course, himself incarnation of Manjushri, of Avalokiteshvara, and so on. So he became another very great servant of the Tibetan people, and the Dalai Lamas have been the servants of Tibetan people. And people go around saying Tibet was a theocracy. That is false. Tibetans don't believe in an omnipotent absolute God. They don't. They believe in gods. They're relative gods. And those gods, the gods like Buddha, who's a relative manifestation of Buddha. And they like humans to recognize that they're relative, so that humans don't accuse the gods of creating evil and suffering, which otherwise humans eventually do. And therefore the gods are all followers of Buddha, actually, in history, according to the Buddhists, which might be fake, of course. So the point is, that's a historical question, and the thing to celebrate about Tsongkhapa in that light is that he declined to nominate or to name an incarnation and to create an incarnation institution. He declined to do that because he felt it would be a greater service to the Tibetan people to have to, and those who are in this monastic university system, to have to strive to lead the order by being the best, most kind, the best servant of the others, the best teacher of the others. He felt. Now, that was, in this light, that was a great thing. And the Dalai Lamas have followed in that vein since then, when allowed to, and they've been great leaders. And this particular Dalai Lama is actually the greatest leader on the planet, actually, at the moment. And he's met almost all the world leaders except the Chinese ones. He never met them. And maybe he never met Putin, I don't know. He met Gorbachev and Yeltsin and so forth, but he may never have met Putin. Because everyone who meets him somehow becomes a little less silly. Somehow. You know, and they sort of get out of Putin's thing like this and this. So it kind of, Thurman didn't say that. Putin was a little too vain, he once said, at the press in Europe, which got the Mongolians and Russia in big trouble. Anyway, but we're talking about Tsongkhapa. So today is the day that Tsongkhapa did that, where he disappeared. And I personally, I have what I call a morphogenetic theory of history. I don't know if you know what that means. Do you know morphic resonance? Did you hear of that concept? You ever heard of Rupert Sheldrake?
Yes.
Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist at Oxford, which really pisses off the materialists at Oxford. But he's a biologist at Oxford who studies imitative patterns in animals. And from that type of, and even in you know, like micro animals, in laboratory settings. And he came up with a theory which he calls morphic or morphogenetic resonance, which is that patterns in the brain of living beings transmit to the brains of other living beings without language or without any kind of attempt to communicate. So it's like the 100 monkey phenomenon. 80 monkeys learn how to not get their hands stuck in a coconut by pulling out too many nuts. You know, they learn to let two go, and then the last 20 learn much quicker. It's kind of studies like that, and he calls that morphic resonance. The way when geese turn, they don't turn in a swoop; they instantly turn when the leader turns, etc. So it's instantaneous. He has photographic things about it, and so on this. And he studied then human fashion. You know, why fads and fashion people suddenly like the look of this or that. It's like a pattern in the brains of beings transmits itself, you know. And we have it in modern terms in what we call vibes. You know, you go somewhere where there are good vibes and you're a little down, but then you feel better because the vibes, like you absorb the vibes. And or you go to a place where there are bad vibes, and even you were feeling good, and you start feeling terrible. So because of the morphic resonance, this event that happened in the turn of the 15th century, it happens to be the time of Petrarch and all, you know, Decameron, you know, the Renaissance. Paolo Cello, Paolo Cello, those guys. They all start painting. Because they all start feeling that the individual being can achieve something, and they don't have to be groveled down under the church. And they feel they can get something, they can do something in life. You know, the human being has value. They become more anthropocentric worldwide, actually. And there's a similar thing happens in Japan and China, actually, in those Ming Dynasty and the Tokugawa, Muromachi and Tokugawa shogunate.
What's your theory on?
And 2 centuries later in Tibet, it leads to the creation of a unique form of society that never lasted anywhere else. It leads to what you could call a monastocratic society. So the absolute opposite of Calvin, Switzerland, and the secularization process. A sacralization process occurs. Amazing thing, actually. But never mind. That's another story. We're just celebrating Tsongkhapa. Today is the day of fulfillment. 1419.
Can you tell us about that morphogenetic theory
What?
of you? Can you tell about that morphogenetic theory of you?
What was the what?
He wants to know about the morphogenetic theory that you have.
Oh yeah, well, it's just that people, you know, when you meditate, it's very important actually for people who contemplate doing retreats, actually. When you study, you know, people get into this thing of should I do a retreat, should I meditate, or should I go out and run a soup kitchen or do something, or go to Africa and start a school, etc., etc. And, you know, different ones, it's correct, either one is correct, actually. It's not that there's one rule. But very important for those who do Mahayana retreats or Bodhisattva or non-dualist retreats, that when something changes in your mind, when your egotism becomes less, when you become less self-involved and self-obsessed and self-preoccupied and always me, and me all the time, and you see through that, and you become a little released from that and more aware of what's around you, and even coming up to the point of enlightenment where you feel that the other life, the other heartbeats around are of equal or greater importance than your own, because there are more of them. Each one is equally important. You come to that, have a visceral feeling of that, which is what enlightenment is. You're not some being off in space. Then, by morphic resonance, whatever degree of that, and all the other beings around you, and even in the whole world, can absorb, there'll be this little shift in their awareness, you know? Like the berserk, you know, shooter might just not shoot one less person because you had such a feeling in your meditation. So the shooter might like say, okay, leave that one alone because they like the clothes they're wearing or something, or whatever. It's like a tiger, you know, like a crocodile. You know, the zebras are going across the water hole, and the crocodile, or the lioness, a better example, the lioness sees the herd running, and she could gobble down and feed her kids and that really boring husband. And she could feed them all with a really juicy, pregnant wildebeest. You know, in the later trimester, whatever it is for wildebeest, the timing. But she lets that one go, and she sees some old, stringy-looking, weird old guy and chomps him up, because he's pretty useless anyway. And then, of course, your materialist would say, oh, she wants to eat that baby too later. When it's grown up, she's going to eat 2 of them. That's why she does it. But actually, she's pregnant herself with cubs, with lion, whatever they call them, lion puppies. And she somehow subliminally has a sense of identification with the wildebeest, but she has to eat them. That's her instinct. So she lets that one go. Just lets it go. And pounces on a creepy old guy. And that is the seed of her Buddhahood, right there. And she got that because you were in a cave in Tibet meditating, and you got less egotistical. You were in Dusseldorf, you know, acupuncturing people, and you got a little less worrying about Gabriel. And then that lioness let that zebra go, or that like wildebeest. That's morphic resonance, that idea. Something like that. So therefore we see in the 5th century, 6th century before the Common Era, in Buddha's time, every culture in Eurasia, at least, we just don't know the histories in sub-Saharan Africa, Australia, and the Americas in those days. We don't really know what happened. They pretend that they were all horrible pyramids and nasty people, but that's their justification for genociding them. So we don't have to believe that, actually. They might have been quite interesting people. They certainly built better cities than London and Madrid and Paris, in Mexico and in Peru, at least, and in mound builders in America. Much bigger and better cities, and a really natural wealth. And so in that 5th century, you have, you know, the pre-Socratics, and then Socrates and Plato. You have Confucius and Lao Tzu. China, you have Zoroaster in Persia. You have these amazing people everywhere at that time doing similar breakthroughs. That's I consider that morphogenetic resonance. And then 1400, we have Renaissance. And of course, the Eurocentric people think we just did that. Leonardo did it. Leonardo was in the time of the 2nd Dalai Lama. He's a contemporary of 2nd, 3rd Dalai Lama. And then Potala building, the 5th Dalai Lama was made head of Tibet, responsible for Tibet. And then they built the Potala building, the huge and amazing palace. And he created a government where he had 1 monk and 1 mendicant and 1 layperson in every office. You know, Secretary of State was 2 people, Secretary of Treasury was 2 people, etc., whatever the equivalents were, to completely ingrain the university system in the government system and completely demilitarized all the regional nobles and made them, gave them back their traditional estate only, not the whole province, as a salary for serving the government in Lhasa and living in a house in Lhasa, having a hotel de ville in Lhasa, in the year of the birth of Louis XIV, of Le Roi Soleil. And Le Roi Soleil built Fontainebleau and Versailles to have a party to lure the barons away from Burgundy and Provence and here and there, so they would stop, you know, having their personal armies, and so he could build a nation. That's the purpose of the party. It wasn't just that he liked frou-frouing around and eating horrible food. Did you know that the food was really awful in Versailles? I know this is sacrilege pour les Français.
No, I think he's the one who reinstated the vegetables, actually.
No. They might have tried, but until Escoffier in the 19th century, French food for those high people was horrible. Why? It was all sculpture.
Oh.
They put the goose meat in with lard, and they sculpted palaces in Greece, and then they dished out the part of the lard, and they had to try to digest that. They really needed Tibetan medicine, 100%. Those poor French nobles.
They were not drinking water.
What?
They were not drinking water.
Whatever they did, they absolutely were tortured until Escoffier, who began serving hot food. Meanwhile, the peasants, when they had food, they were serving it hot in their houses and their stews and things, But only Escoffier started hot food in France. I was shocked when I heard that. I couldn't believe it, and apparently it's true.
Well, I need-
Anyway, that's the science. What?
I need evidence.
I know. Well, look it up. That guy who was played by your famous actor who then tried to migrate to Russia to avoid Hollande's tax.
Depardieu.
Oh yeah, he's a lovely guy. He was in a movie with Uma. I like him.
Okay.
But the cook that he was, so that he was doing that sculpture stuff, not hot food, not a decent burger to be found. That's why you're in Portland.
I was wondering why. Now I know.
Anyway, any other question? No, about selflessness. That's the most important thing. And then also Tsongkhapa, he also did another innovation. He did this amazing thing. You know those giant tankas on mountains?
Yes.
You know the huge one that's like comes down a whole mountain. He started that.
Yes.
These are tankas that are like an acre size. Icons of Buddha or medicine Buddha, whatever. Huge thing. But where did that come from? Because that came from his time. Because in his time, the Tibetans were having these mass visions all the time. They would look up and there was like a thing like this would be in the sky, and everybody, not just the psychics and the mystics, everybody would see them. And then there's a festival somewhere, and then they'd go there. And this happened in Europe too. Francis of Assisi's time, people would have visions, and the whole village would be, and then people would come from other villages, and they'd have festivals. And of course, modern materialists, that's hagiography. That can't happen because we're materialists. But the ultimate killer one on that, I have to say, it's a side story, but it's sort of relevant. I have a friend called Raoul Birnbaum, who's a professor at Santa Cruz, if he's still alive. I haven't seen him in a couple of decades. But he went to Wutai-Shen in China, in the 80s. And that's a place, it's the Holy Land of Manjushri. There are 5 mountains. And they're weird mountains that are all flat on top, all 5 of them. And there's springs coming up on top of these mountains, which is kind of weird. There's no really higher mountains around, but they're springs. So there's supposed to be pure land of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Okay? And then there's a tradition there that there are mass visions there that people commonly see for centuries. They've always done that. And he was studying there in the 80s, and he saw some himself. But he got tired of coming back, and nobody would believe him that he'd gone native, and he was part of the cult or something, mass hypnosis, whatever it was. So he gave a speech at the American Asian Studies Academy in the spring of 87 or 85, I can't remember exactly. So I happened to be there. And at the high moment of the speech, he pulled out this road sign, which was one of those like white road signs with red Chinese characters written on it, with chains on the 2 ends of the sign, that you put across the road to block a road, like construction ahead or something like that. And the Chinese speakers in the audience all agreed, and it said, "Do not go further. Mass visions are illegal in the People's Republic of China." On a road sign. So it's just evident. So it was a marvelous time. When when you do that meditation where you visualize like the medicine Buddha or the wonderful Yutok Yanden Gombo, the medicine guy, when you do that, like the whole people would see that. So then they later sort of lost that. It didn't happen so often. So then they made those whole tankas that were so big, they would unroll them once a year, and some of them would go dive down, like in Drebon, it went down, it goes down an entire mountain. It must be like 150 yards long, and 48 yards wide. It's incredible. Then they started that at that time, to reflect those mass visions, I think. And there's no record of them before that time.
But 94, there was something like that in a mountain, 94, when I was in Tibet. They had a mountain with that.
You saw them?
Yeah, I
That's
saw
great.
it.
Yeah, they still have a few of them around. It's marvelous. Any other question?
I think Isa's got
Oh yeah,
one.
he founded the Tantric Datsangs. There was no Tantric Datsangs in the monastery. Well, like Gyude
Jume.
Datsang, and Daebong, Gombong. So the idea that some younger people would go straight to Tantra and created that curriculum also, which was an innovation from that time.
Can I say something, Bob?
What?
Can I say something?
Sure, please.
Okay. Do you want to say anything?
Chitta Sukha Samsara.
Finish your job.
My job is done.
It is a very happy day, but come on, that's your turn.
Okay, I'm going to say something.
Okay,
Get
good.
ready. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about in terms of, the place where I spend a lot of time and know a little bit about is those aspects of the self that keep you from being able to move into that selfless place. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed, I'm just going to make a couple of general statements and then see what you think about them, okay? One of the things that I've noticed is that, let me just explain. In shamanism, there's this concept of power loss as a root cause for imbalance. And this is called power loss. Power loss. And in shamanism, it's described as a kind of energy drain that's happening in the individual who's suffering a particular symptom. And there are particular symptoms that are related to power loss that are corrected with power retrieval. But I'm not going to go too far into that because I want to go over to the Siddha side of it, which is, from a Buddhist point of view, that state of power loss, which is described again as an energy drain or energy kind of leaking out of the person. That state of power loss within the Siddha concepts would or could be described as a disconnection from one's own Buddha nature. And that disconnection occurs through our reactivity to being vulnerable. Usually that's that first thing that you were talking about, that reaction to being harmed or something like that, and then that being the thing that consolidates the self and makes it hard for the self to be able to move into the next stages of the meditation that you were describing, right? So in shamanism, this is called being in a state of power loss, and in Buddhism, this would be called being, one could say, it's a function of the disconnection from one's Buddha nature. Would you agree? This makes sense to you so far? So then all of the strategies that we go into to try to accommodate that sense of power loss are the stuff of karmic patterns, because we're trying to avoid that pain again, or we're trying to be attached to something that we think is going to avoid, that is going to keep us from going into that vulnerability again. Or we develop misconceptions about, oh, this is what I have to do in order not to go into that vulnerability again. And so you have people who have these different strategies for accommodating their power loss that keep them on the surface of experience with other people, where you have energetic exchanges, where you have people fighting over the available life energy, which is low when you have a lot of people who are in a state of power loss, and almost everyone is in a state of power loss. And then what happens is that you have all of these karmic connections and interactions that get established with energy exchanges that are unsatisfactory for everyone, which then augments what now in psychology would be called ego structures that are designed to try to keep the person out of power loss. And that, I think this is a pretty good description of one aspect of the psychological environment that we're dealing with when we're trying to help restore health. And one of the big problems that we have in Western medicine, for instance, is there is no concept of energy. There is no concept of this subtle experience, what in some systems are called chi or prana, lung, and so they don't have any kind of remedy for it. They don't have any way to address it. And what we try to do in depth hypnosis, which is the model that counseling model that I developed, which combines shamanic and Buddhist understandings about the nature of suffering, is we try to use the therapeutic environment as a way to first gather power that is universal power that leads the person back into connection essentially with their Buddha nature. And so the second session that you have in depth hypnosis is that power retrieval after we do the emotional biography. Now, what happens, and those of you that are in the Shamans and Siddhas class, you saw this happen in class, where there was, when we were doing the shamanic journey and making the connection with the universal source of power in the form of a helping spirit, there were some people that had difficulty connecting with that source of power because their karmic patterns that they normally run were brought forward as they were trying their usual strategies to gain power, and they weren't working, so they could not connect with universal power. When those configurations make themselves evident, and they do through we set up processes to make sure they do happen in depth hypnosis. When you get those configurations coming up, then you can work on helping the person dismantle their attachments, their aversions, and their misconceptions, so that they can access their Buddha nature, so that they can come out of that sense of power loss, so they can be integrated enough to even participate in this kind of meditation that you described. Because if you have not healed the self to a certain level, you cannot do this kind of meditation without going crazy. You have to have a certain level of integration, and you have to have a process that disrupts the usual non-successful but that holds hope everlasting for the people that are doing it, that they are going to be successful in trying to gain power. So you have to break up those conceptualizations, those attachments, those aversions, and the patterns that they create, and connect the person with their Buddha nature so that they can rest in it, so they can let go of their selfishness, so they can let go of their ego constructs, and so that they can allow themselves to even look around and see what's beyond the self-consolidation that their pain and suffering is creating for them. So I think, this meditation that you provided is, I am so grateful for that. That was like, I feel like I really understood something about as they say in French, the au-delà, that I hadn't understood before. It was so helpful. But I think that I just wanted to bring this idea of the importance of also working at the level that we work at in depth hypnosis, which is a much more basic level, actually,
Sure.
to help people get into a place where they can actually do that meditation. And again, the nice thing about depth hypnosis is that it is the combination of the catalytic processes of shamanic practice and working with the map, the wonderful map that Buddhism provides as a source of suffering. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there and see what kind of comments you might have or thoughts you might have about that. Either one of you. You or
My
either
job
one
was
of
done
you.
too. Well, no, I think that's, of course, you're quite right. I thought to share that other thing because I feel, you see, if you, in Tibet, you first, in the Lamrim sort of thing, you first have to develop detachment, and what they call renunciation, where you withdraw from various greed-driven things. Then you have to develop compassion, where you withdraw from various hatred-driven things. And then you, by that time, and then, of course, there has to be an ethical set of ethical changes, where you calm your life pattern down by being less turbulent with others, which you will become when you are less greedy and less angry. And so that, of course, goes without saying, that you can't really succeed in the more difficult selflessness thing until that is the case. On the other hand, and so if you go to a Tibetan teacher or a Buddhist teacher, they will not immediately teach selflessness. And even in Buddhist history, like the farmer, the donor of the monastery, etc., he would not be taught selflessness. Because that would be considered confusing and like, who am I and what? They wouldn't get into that at all. And there's an idea that emptiness, even taught to the wrong person, could lead them into a problem. But in our modern period, there is one difference about that. One reason I don't shrink from sharing these things, and even though, as I said, it was a rehearsal. It takes a long time to really do it, those 4 keys. But because I think it's really important, it's something that Tibetan Buddhist teaching brought in, which had never been available through Zen or through any Theravada traditions or Pure Land, which is the idea that the no-self thing in Buddhism is not rejecting the relative self. Psychiatrists, for example, and psychologists and Western people were very scared of both Hinduism and Buddhism because of all this talk that you heard in the 60s and 50s and 70s about throw away your ego. No, let's not have an ego. Oh yeah, the main thing is egolessness. Let's not, no self, yeah. They thought, oh my, we're going to have a bunch of basket cases because of that. But the point is, the Tibetans were much more careful about it. What you're doing is freeing yourself from the delusion of the absoluteness of your ego. You need a strong ego to do that, and you cultivate that strong ego through cultivating compassion, through cultivating self-restraint, certainly, if we were doing it a longer pattern, Okay? And then, as far as emptiness goes, the danger of sharing emptiness with the unsuitable vessel had to do with the fact that the unsuitable vessel was considered to be the person simplistically who just had faith in something. And they were fitting into their niche in society and doing their job. And they were, they were spiritualistic in a religious way. And if they introduced to this kind of emptiness, they might doubt that and lose that. You follow? But modern people are a bunch of materialist nihilists already. They've already been bitten by the serpent of nihilism, which makes them formally psychotic, actually. And members of a formally psychotic culture that is not connected to the planet it's on. And that's why it's destroying the planet. And thinks that everything will be solved just by dying. And it's become so bad that we are destroying the planet. There's no doubt of it. And so in a way, the emptiness becomes an antidote to the nihilism, rather than a danger of leading to the nihilism, if you follow me. Of course, there are those nihilists, they call themselves secular Buddhists, and they go around saying, yeah, Buddhism is just like science, and we all don't exist. That's what Buddha said. And of course, they're misleading people, and they're confused themselves. And there always will be misunderstanding of everything. But that emptiness equals relativity, and that relativity equals that everything you do will have infinite consequence, and particularly the beginning, and 100% beginning of the Buddhist path. And I would say in most well-developed, other than the most backward or the most primitive tribal societies, let's call it indigenous or oral societies, the idea that the human being's spirit has continuity after death and probably before birth is a common sense thing of all humanity forever. And this unique idea that we can just get out of here by shooting ourselves or shooting somebody else is unique, to a modern period. And they're shouting and screaming how religions have caused trouble. And they always seem to forget about Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, who were not religious. But they were nihilists of different kinds. So relativity is something that, when you say connect, again, when you say connect to Buddha nature, then how does one define Buddha nature? Actually, the highest definition of Buddha nature is freedom, emptiness itself. And it means that each being has the nature to find their inner Buddhahood. It isn't like you have a little Buddha and a homunculus inside the soul or something. It's that because of emptiness, which means freedom, everyone is a work of art. Everyone is a work of evolutionary construction. And if they become conscious of that, they can design their evolution to lead to Buddhahood as the culmination of evolution, right? The highest form of possible being. And actually, that's another book I'm going to write, Kevin. And you like it, I'm going to borrow from you, and I'll give attribution of the Chitta
Sukha Samsara.
Sukha Samsam. Because the title of that book is going to be Buddhas Have More Fun. So I do like that. But of course, the psychology thing, in the Western psychology, of course, is dealing with people who are crippled by this backward culture that we have. The nuclear family due to industrialization, the over focus on the parents rather than a bunch of aunts and uncles and cousins, etc., in the older, more healthy societies, and the basic idea of this sort of that there's no point and purpose to it all, and it's just all go out and make some money and whatever, And people are damaged by that, and therefore there's a lot of subnormal people. And so psychology is sort of focused on them, but unfortunately, it focuses on them and the idea of healing is to bring them into being effective aggressors in an aggressive society. And that's not really helping them so much, So the mixture thing is kind of complicated in the sense that the thing about power retrieval is good, but the key there, I would say, in both traditions, at least both Buddhist psychological traditions and shamanic traditions, I don't know, the Western one will be different. So it's good to have a mediating connection with the West. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that the key to the shamanic one is also the exceptional person, not everybody in the society. And the way that they really retrieve power is by giving up all power. And the way the Buddhists do the emptiness thing is by completely letting go of everything. And then realizing that the universe is the power. And you get buoyed up. It's like the dark night of the soul. Those few Christian yogis who were allowed to survive in the monasteries like John of the Cross. Dark night of the soul, and then you completely give up, and then you're buoyed by the loving power of the divine, that's a brilliant Buddha nature retrieval, even though they have a different Christian language for it. So it's a tricky thing that some people in this culture, in other words, could appropriate this power retrieval thing as, again, another unsuccessful self-defense thing because of the language of power, and because if you go down to the depth in the shamanic thing, which again was the virtuoso in those societies, who was the shaman, they were called, they had those calling experiences where they would go crazy, actually. So actually they would have to go crazy to then find out that even going crazy, reality will bring them back to life, And the animals will come and bring them, and the trees and the plants, and then they're there to heal the society. So one has to be careful, I think, with that, that's all.
I totally agree, yeah. And you wouldn't do those kinds of processes without the proper container and setting. Right.
I think so.
Well, I think we have to go, actually. It's 6 o'clock. Do you want to take a question, Bob? You want to take one more question?
Sure, if anybody has one.
I just have a short word about your speech.
What's that?
I want to say something.
Okay. Good.
My job is not done. So I think you talked about power, and the professor talked about wisdom. So in Tibetan Buddhism, we have three main Buddhas. The Buddha of wisdom, Manjushri,
Yes.
and Buddha of power, Vajrapani. And then there's another Buddha, is Buddha of compassion, and Chenrezig.
That's right.
So I think, I often think why they are called the three main Buddhas. So this is the three opportunity for different type of people. Some people are very smart, very sharp and very intelligent and university analyzing like professor. And those people, I think they're very good for, going through this Jetsongkhapa's path. And then another group, they are maybe not that smart, or they're not ready for this path, but they are more talking about power. So that's like Vajrapani group. Vajrapani is like the power Buddha. And so I think that makes sense, First you don't have powers, so you try to get the power or regain the power, and then of course later the power joined with wisdom. Then the third group is a group of love and compassion. So they meditate on love and compassion, from ordinary love to unconditional love or universal compassion, and then to bodhicitta. And then once you have that bodhicitta, you have a power too. Then you join with wisdom. So I think that's why, like Tibetan medicine says, the best medicine is the correct medicine. So that's why we cannot say everyone have to be very smart or scholar, or also we cannot say everyone have to be a shaman to get the power. So there are many different group of people, and the best is they find their own way. But at the end, I think they are all joined together. Yeah. So three groups: the love group, power group, and wisdom group. And now there are three representatives. I just say love and compassion.
Very good. Excellent. So now we're going to go have a candlelight puja and dinner.
Isa, can I ask you just a quick question? Can you give an example of a universal connection? Did I say it right? A universal connection that you're saying that when people have become powerless, we give them I think you said universal connection, or is that too long?
What's an example of helping a person who's in a state of power loss connect with universal power?
Universal.
Is that the question?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Well, the way that you would do that in shamanic practice is you would have a person journey and alter their state of consciousness, usually through some kind of repetitive sound, so that they can deepen their perceptual capacities to be able to perceive something larger or more subtle than their usual suffering, right? And the intentionality there, when you're helping someone walk that path, is to say within the journey that you are going to connect, and in depth hypnosis we actually adapt the journey into something a little bit more mainstream, and we say that you're going to connect with a part of the self that has only your highest good as its sole intent. And we do this in a hypnotherapeutic process. So they're going internally, they're doing an adapted journey on a quest for power, and they don't have to think about it being outside of themselves or the fact that there's feathers or drums or anything like that. They only have to consider the possibility that there is a part of themselves that does have their best and highest good as its sole intent, and which is wise. And then they connect with that through an image that is meaningful to them: a light, a sound, a mythic, an archetypal being, an animal, a plant, or a person. And then that part of the self then becomes the anchor, or the safe harbor that they return to again and again as they're doing the work of repairing and dissolving the karmic patterns that are keeping them from being able to hold that power, and rebuilding themselves. That's the part of the self that helps them rebuild themselves into a more coherent sense of self that is not disconnected but connected.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
We make a short video and eat dinner.
Having a communal feast. Gotta check it out.
We're gonna have dinner together.
Can I go with you? You're absolutely welcome.
Shaman and Siddhas will be in the barn after dinner, and then the practice group from the Tibetan rejuvenation will be here after dinner, I believe.
Okay, sounds good, no? Yeah, right. Very interesting, right?
And we talked about trying to do shamans and siddhas in